Just quick recap. Last week we were talking about EC targeting, how the program kind of works when you use a target, what it's going to do. The very last thing that I kind of squeezed in there was like when we are not using P2s and you needed your EC to go up, it's going to shave off some of those P2s automatically. So if you had it set up here, it's going to actually cut a couple of those off to prevent runoff. And it's a sliding scale. So as your EC starts to go up, this will also start adding them back in until you're back to your original point. Same thing, decrease EC. When you're not using P2s and we don't want to, we don't want to sacrifice like our dryback here by adding P2s, but we need to get the EC down. It's going to add in a flush, a configurable flush right here at the very end of our P1s. And basically, I just think of the flush as like a custom programmable like final P1 where you can enter in whatever duration you want. And the whole point of why it's there is because we're already at the point of max saturation. So the majority of the irrigations that we're going to put through, the majority of the ML volume that's going through, going into it is going to come out of the bottom and then flush it out without having to sacrifice any of the rest of our dryback time. So I only reason to recap that is because that brings us into kind of talking about this flush specifically right here. On the schedule page in Copilot, yeah, fuck, it's just a little schedule tab at the top. I don't know where it's at right here. But basically right underneath you have P1s as a bar, then you've got P2s, and then you have this flush right here with the enable or disable. And then as you can see, it's just a single duration text box um, that you can enter in here. If you're using autopilot and you have an EC target put in, it's actually going to increase and decrease this duration automatically, and it's going to scale. So like if you're way off of your EC target and you need to, flush a lot more to get the EC down, it's going to increase this. And like I said, as you get closer to your EC target, it's going to scale this back to where your flush becomes less and less and less. Um, so you don't, it does say it's typically only used when P2s are not enabled, such as in like early flower when the EC time climbs too high. It needs to be corrected without sacrificing dryback, like I just said. But if you're running it yourself with Copilot, you could totally use this flush with P2s if you needed to for any reason. So a lot of times we use, like I said, if you need to cut your dryback down and you need those P2s to extend your irrigation in time, but you're like, man, I cannot wait. I'm seeing really bad signs of burning right now and I need to get my substrate down. You can absolutely toss a flush in between your P1 and P2s, really hammer it with, a good amount of runoff, and then let your P2s continue on. All right. So that brings us to failsafe. That's the final bar on the schedule page. This is going to be right underneath flush. And basically, this is a sensor trigger timer hybrid override that is always running in the background for your protection while you're running your timers, like your regular P1s and P2s, and even potential flushes. This is something separate. This is basically a outside of that timer window, it is just a sensor trigger that is running at all times. You can enter your trigger point here. So it says when zone 2 moisture falls below, and then you enter whatever that you want that number, that minimum threshold number to be. Put that here. Basically, what's going to happen is it is going to, and we have a little diagram here to kind of explain this. It's going to do one of two things. It is either going to, it's going to kick on a valve. It's going to start irrigating on either a live sensor or until a max runtime has been hit. So for example, if we hit 19.5 and we're dropping below 19.5, it's going to kick the valve open. When that valve opens, it's going to start irrigating again, and it will either kick it off when it reaches back and returns to 19.5, or if it runs for up to 2 minutes straight first, whichever of these come first. So as you can see, this sensor drops below 19.5, it triggers the valve right here, and it goes one of two ways, either until the sensor reads back to its number again, which that's actually an error, they need to change that to 19.3, or until 2 minutes of watering passes, whichever of these happens first. If we trigger this 2 minutes of max runtime, right, what's going to happen then is it's going to then wait to reevaluate this number again. So say we triggered 2 minutes, Then it's going to wait for this reevaluation period. It says reevaluate every, and then you enter in whatever time you want. I usually do anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. That's usually plenty of time to let the substrate, to give whatever size substrate it is, to let all the water wick out and settle and redisperse and give me an accurate reading again, that represents whatever that volume of water added in actually is going to equate to. And so once it hits this reevaluation period, so as we can see here, we come in, we end up doing 2 minutes because that happens first before this. And then now we're going to wait for a 30-minute time delay. After that 30-minute time delay, it's going to recheck the sensor again, right? So if it is still below this number, so like right here, still below, then it rinses and repeats into this cycle right down here all night. So basically it'll still be it'll wait 30 minutes. It's still below, again, this is fucking me up, but 19.5 or 23, whatever the number is. As long as it's below your target, it's going to do a 2-minute watering or up to 2 minutes where it either goes here or it reaches a sensor and then it's going to keep going. If it is above 23 or above that minimum threshold, then it resets and you're right back to the very beginning again. So if it goes below, it's going to either act as a sensor trigger or a timer, whichever one comes first. And then if it is a timer, then it's going to wait a reevaluation period that you customize before it rechecks this value and then rinses and repeats the whole process. And the main reason that we did this is that some substrates and irrigation setup take time to show changes on a sensor. So if you've got a cocoa in a large pot and you're using low flow emitters, it can take a while for the water to spread through the media and reach the sensor. So a lot of times we'll have a scenario where we trigger a feed and it was already pretty dry, so that water had to make its way all throughout that substrate and redistribute itself. And that could take five, I've even seen like 10 minutes of a delay between you give an irrigation event and then you see a spike, the accurate spike that comes after that. And so in a scenario where you are on just a live sensor trigger, like you can set up in our regular sensor trigger rules, what's going to happen is you're just going to turn the valve on and you're going to be watering for that full 10 minutes or however long it takes for the sensor to register that water has occurred. And then you're going to have a massive spike. It's going to overwater during the night, and then you're going to fuck up your whole next day. So this is why we put this in here is mainly for people running larger pots. You don't typically have too big of a delay when you're running rock wool. Rockwool, it's like usually never more than 30 seconds. And cocoa, if you keep it down at 1 gallon or a 2 gallon pot and you size your drippers appropriate, you're not using like point threes, but maybe like some several point fives in there, you usually won't have more than like a minute delay or so. But when you start getting into threes, fives, stuff like that, and you're sticking with like point 0.5 emitters, um, even if there's a lot of them, it can really cause issues. If you do find yourself having issues where you have significant delays, you in a larger pot, you can just step up your emitter size, go to ones, maybe even twos, which is not normally what I recommend because again, the whole point of when we're saturating these pots, we want to have a small shot of water, we want to let it disperse, have another shot of water, let it disperse, and just slowly keep stacking to where we like really are saturating everything fully through natural wicking. When you put a higher flow in there, it's going to force more water than what it can actively like hold at that time, and it could potentially cause channeling to run through, and that doesn't give us that leaves dry spots. That doesn't give us the most accurate saturation. So that is why this was made and how it was fine-tuned like this. Um,
We did have one question come in here. Should the EC always be what the target is set for, or just during P3? I notice mine will hit the target during P3, but it will flush it all out down to input EC during lights on.
Yeah, so the program when it's doing auto EC targeting is always going to pay attention to the highest EC value that occurred during that 24-hour period. So sometimes that can follow suit with moisture or with your moisture content, depending on what's going on in the substrate. But most of the time, it's going to be at the driest point, so like right here. So it doesn't matter when that is, but just know that like whatever that highest point it got to. that is what it's going to use as its basis. So if like up here, say you had 5 as a target and it got up to like 7 up here, it is going to push a significant amount of runoff trying to get this point right here to 5. Uh,
Hmm.
I pay attention to both. So like I think I said this last week where if I notice like my when I'm maximally saturated down here at this point here, I usually that's like my baseline. If that is sitting at let's say 5, right? And this is up at 8 down here, and I want to bring this 5 down to 4, then I need to set this down to 7. I just need to go a little bit under so that it can do the same thing here. Like I always, if you need this number to go down, whether it's this number right here, this number right here, wherever it happens to be, if you need the numbers to go down, you're going to want to set your target to be either slightly higher or lower um, in relation to your max that you hit in that 24-hour period. So,
Awesome. Thanks, sir. You can go ahead and keep going now.
okay, so now we're getting into this advanced strategy section. I mean, all this is like just what I do. It's what I work with a lot of people on, and it's a strategy that I've kind of, it definitely didn't make it. It's like accumulation of things I've tried, things a lot of other people that I get information from and respect have told me to try, and I've had good results with it. And it is how I currently use the program when running in my rooms. So take these with what you will. These are not the be all end all set points of like you have to run these, or if you don't run these, it's not going to be good. This is just what I do. And with this note right here, as I put these targets in, because so many people are always asking for targets, they're like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And the thing to remember is like every room is set up different. Every level of control is different. I have to give this disclaimer because if you like, for example, right here, if you can't only attempt these targets if you can maintain stable temperature and humidity. Significant environmental swings, especially high relative humidity during lights off, will cause you some serious problems. That's my nice way of saying we'll fuck things up. You can't like these things right here are in a min-maxed room where like everything is dialed in. So think of this as like I would love to do these things as long as I had complete control over everything. All my equipment's dialed. I'm not undersized on any units. You get what I'm saying? Like, this is like in an ideal scenario. If you are not in an ideal scenario, or you have like maybe one thing that's a little off, like say you don't have enough dehu or something like that, well, that's going to mean that we need to maybe not be as aggressive as this, maybe not as extreme. Maybe we tone things down just a little bit because, like as I've said before, with weed, there's like a couple fundamental pillars. Like leaf surface temp, VPD, PPFD, CO2 supplementation, things like that, and environmental stability. All of those things need to be up at the top, at the very peak for photosynthesis to reach 100%. If even one of those things is down, it's going to limit all the plant from utilizing everything else that it's being given. So if one of those things is down here, you pretty much have to bring everything down to that level. Otherwise, you can end up causing a lot of stress because let's say you don't have the right VPD, you don't have the right leaf surface temperature, or anything like that, but you're like blasting PPFD. Now you're just stressing it because you're giving it a ton of light that it can't do anything with. It doesn't have the capacity to do what it needs to do. Or let's say you've got everything dialed in except for no CO2 supplementation. It needs that CO2 supplementation to be able to like fuel its ability to run at essentially 100%. So with that
Uh,
said, what's up?
I think this question is going to lead into your next section here. So for the temp targets and VPD, what are you using for VPD? Are you using leaf surface temp or ambient air temp for that VPD calculation? I don't think we have covered this yet. And then should I run 80 Fahrenheit under ambient CO2 if I'm not injecting CO2, which I think you just covered that you need to have all of those covered. So
Yeah, so I do use leaf surface temp to calculate my VPD. I use leaf surface temp to actually calculate what my ambient air temp is, like what I'm setting it on my HVAC and stuff too. So like I'll check what my leaf surface temp is, and if it's 82, for example, chances are, and I'm running LEDs, chances are my room's air temp is actually around like 84, maybe even 85. If I'm running double endeds, it's probably chilling around 79 or 80. It's like really it just depends. Usually you're gonna have to adjust your ambient air temp a little bit to make sure you hit your target leaf surface temp as you want to. And because of that, it's gonna adjust all when it comes to control, we are going off of ambient air temp and RH, the room humidity. But how I determine what my ambient air temp should be is via leaf surface temp. So like I'll put that whatever it needs to be as long as my leaf surface temp is where I want it to be. And then from there I'm going to adjust my humidity in relation to whatever that ambient air temp is to hit the VPD level that I want to hit. When it comes to nighttime, I don't really go off leaf surface temp all that much because there is no radiation going on in the air, and usually the leaf surface temp is pretty damn close to what my ambient air temp is. So I can just kind of go off of whatever my sensors are reading at that point. I don't need to go in there and flare gun a leaf canopy in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
So um,
Makes sense to me. But yeah, I think that actually jumps right into that next
oh
point.
yeah, and then the CO2 question, I think I remember
Yeah.
what you said. Yeah, I mean CO2, it's not necessary, but it damn sure makes it to where your plant can utilize because see, here's the thing that's going on. People will look at this shit and be like, damn, you run, zero point 0.8 to 1 kPa all the way into, week 5 and 6 of flower. And it's like, yeah, I do. But it's because I have all of these other things here. I want maximum rate of growth the whole time. And it's also, which I'm going to cover down in these considerations, it's also if you look at my lights off, I'm very conservative when it comes to lights off RH. Daytime, I'm very humid, a lot more humid than a lot of people, a lot more humid than a lot of people are comfortable running. Um, but it's because my nighttime is in check. I would not do this if my nighttime wasn't in check. I also would not do this. I don't know if I put it in here, but like I also wouldn't run this humid if I had a history of, PM like in my facility. If I was battling with systemic PM throughout my mom's cuts and everything else, this is not obviously a strategy that you want to run. And there, I'm going to give that disclaimer too. Like you have to use your own discretion. You know your environment a hell of a lot better than I do. And if some things just they're not meant for everyone, unless you were gonna scratch everything, bleach it all, really start fresh and not have that issue that you're battling, I would not run this as aggressive as what I do here. If you're not battling that, then absolutely send it and see how you like it, because I do know that this basically, there is no crazy science strategy behind any of this or bro science. This is just what I have found to be like plants enjoy this. Plants like this. It's warm, it's humid, which is what plants like, in tropical environment when they grow big and luscious. I'm pumping CO2 in there and I'm giving them the right amount of light. That's as simple as it is. I'm not going crazy or doing certain things for certain reasons. I'm basically just like, how can I get the most stomatal activity? How can I get the most photosynthesis and transpiration and just most like cell activity? How can I get like the highest cell activity in the plant possible? And it's like, well, under these veg-like conditions is when the plant's ripping. That's what it likes. Now, obviously, we have to scale those down as the weeks go on because we start hey, we're no longer, doing a ton of veg growth at that point. We're not trying to push that way, but also we're really focused on not ruining the buds that we're trying to get. So like for example, like I do run pretty warm considering compared to a lot of people, but I notice in come week 8 of flower, like I am staying typically under that 76 degree mark. Not because I'm trying to produce color or like, oh, I know I need cold or whatever for anthocyanins, I can't even pronounce it, all those things. But really, it's because I don't want to, a lot of terpenes are volatile, and a lot of the major ones will volatilize out past 75, 76 degrees. And so when you come into a room late flower and it's reeking, it could be potentially because you got it too warm in there, and it's just naturally they're just volatilizing in the air. So I basically want to keep it as warm as I can keep it without risking, any terpene, a ton of terpene loss. You're always going to get some, but I don't want to, risk more than what I have to. And then, like I said, at nighttime, I am at 55% RH just straight across the board for the majority of flour, and then I start stepping it down to 50, 45, and 40 in the final couple weeks there. So this is pretty low, I think, for what a lot of people run. Usually they're in the 60s or so. I just like to keep it here and low, especially come weeks. I don't know if I talk about this all throughout, but I'm just going to say it right here. But I like to keep my humidity low at night the whole way through, even in veg, simply because when your humidity is lower at night and you've got good airflow, you are going to cause more transpiration than if it was stagnant and humid in the room. And I want as much transpiration as possible, even in veg, even in early flower, because it's going to produce or promote the most drybacks, the biggest overnight drybacks that I can potentially get. It's water movement through the plant. And another benefit of this is, calcium. Calcium is immobile. The only way calcium is getting all the way to the leaves and up through the plant is through water movement. So when we overwater and veg and we keep it too humid at night and not enough airflow is ripping through there, you're gonna not have enough calcium, which is why people get those CalMag deficiencies often. And it's like you're not gonna have enough calcium, and also your drybacks are gonna be shit. You're not gonna pull in, and you're gonna lose out on the DO as well. You're not gonna have as much oxygen coming in to the substrate. So I don't I'm not worried about the plants growing too much. I'm not saying they don't do anything at night, but I'm definitely not worried about like sacrificing growth at night. So I'm just like, look, in fact, if anything, I just want to keep things moving, keep things rocking and rolling, and it also keeps things safe. If I was blasting humidity all day long, I was at 75% humidity during the day. I don't want to also rock 75% humidity at night, especially if it's colder in the room. So that's like a breeding ground and for pathogens and not good things. So that is why I do those things there. But as you notice, my veg right here is identical to my flower week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You see my range does change. It bumps up to zero point 0.8 to 1.2. This gives people, you know, so I shift and evolve. This is what I like to do, but depending on the genetics I'm running, how thick they are, how dense they're growing, in both canopy and bud structure, how my airflow is looking in that room, just a whole lot of factors coming into play. That's going to determine how aggressive I'm going to be. So there's sometimes where I will absolutely run this all the way to week 6. I'm still running 70% humidity during the day. But again, it can also go down from, 1.2. And as you can see, come week 6, that's usually when I'm starting to worry a little bit more about the terpenes, and I want to start, cooling it down, giving it kind of like its natural progression that it would have in nature during a normal season. And we're just going to start bringing it down lower and lower and lower. We don't really go all that low. And in terms of humidity, I'm still staying up pretty high. I'm still getting at 65% humidity. That's what this equates to here, during week 8, during the daytime. So, yeah, like I said, I don't want to ever sacrifice growth. I don't flush for this reason. I want to make sure that I am giving the plant everything it needs. I do not want to ever starve it for anything, and we'll go into that later too. But yeah, CO2. Hopefully that makes sense with temp, humidity, why I'm choosing those things. If you've got more questions, just ask. I'm happy to dive into that. CO2. Really, I don't think that I know for a fact I've seen a lot of studies where CO2, the benefits of running CO2 drops off exponentially past 1500 ppms. So it's like a diminishing return where you're going to get some benefit, but for the amount of money cost that's going in with the amount of CO2 you got to pump, it's definitely not worth it at that point for you. So I think anywhere at around the 12, between 12 and 1500 is a sweet spot. I don't even think most plants are going to use all that 1500 to be worth it, but a lot of times I'll just run 1250, anywhere from 1250 or so, and then 1250 is my target set point typically, and then or 1300, and then I'll use like 100 ppm deadband so that I can kind of bounce in between that. And as long as I'm given that, I've never really seen a difference going any higher. I definitely don't want to go lower. I have definitely seen differences when I go under, you know, under. I would say under 1,000, you're really going to see some differences, but I like to keep it under 1,200. And then PPFD, this is highly variable, extremely highly variable between what lights you're using, what spectrums they have, what genetics you have, and how sensitive they are to light. Some plants don't need a lot and don't want a lot and are going to perform really negatively if you try to push too much on them. Others can't get enough. You'll know that based on if your plant, if you push the PPFD up high and the plants start exhibiting signs of light toxicity. So when you start seeing that, well, you need to back that shit down. Typically, though, I don't find that I really need more than like 900 ppfd. I do use under canopies, but even before then, like I wasn't going all that crazy high, like 1,000, 1,100. I mean, 1,200, sure. That's why I put it at a range here. It's like for genetics that really wanted it, yeah, I could get up there, but I've definitely had problems where I cooked, but plants were not happy when I would push anything more than that. So what I like is to run a lower, if I can get away with under canopies in there, I would rather keep it an even 7 or 800 throughout the whole internal and up top versus just blasting it really, really hard up top. Um, I feel like it's kind of like an even cooking it all the way around versus just broiling it. So. Um, yeah. So if you got any questions on those, just type them in. We can always go back through there, but I do want to go through these environmental target considerations. So like what I have down here, it's like leaf surface temperature. Should be the primary focus during lights on. The ambient air temperature should be raised or lowered to dial in your leaf surface temperature. LED usually means higher ambient air temp. HID usually means lower ambient air temp. Kind of what I was saying before. You might have to raise it up a little bit if you're running LEDs because they don't put out that radiant heat. And then same thing with double endeds, HIDs, anything like that. They're always going to put out more heat, so you got to run it a little bit cooler. I've already said this too. Lights off temp is going to be pretty similar typically to your ambient air temp, so no need to focus on leaf surface temp at night. Daytime humidity should be adjusted based on VPD using temperature as the constant, and that's actually how our platform works. So like if you're doing, so if you're like using set points and targets in there, and you want to set basically what we do is like you can change your humidity like up in the little target set point thing and it's going to auto calculate your VPD, right? And same thing, if you change your temperature, it's going to auto calculate your VPD. They all three of those things as a triangle will always just kind of show you, oh, I changed this. It's going to auto calculate what that change is going to be. Um, and the way we do things to make it simple and how it, in my opinion, how it should be is we use temperature as our constant. So when it comes to creating that VPD calculation, temperature is the thing that doesn't change, of course, unless we're changing it. But like, let's just say I want to adjust my VPD from 1.1 to 1, right? I'm not going to do so by adjusting my temperature typically. Typically, if you were to go in and change your VPD to 1.1, it's going to adjust your humidity instead because again, temperature, we're trying to hit an optimal leaf surface temp. That's not something we want to be fluctuating up and down. Humidity is the variable that we want to be fluctuating so that we can keep our leaf surface temperature the same. I do instead, as you can see up here, I did put these parentheses in here. At first, we didn't have them, which is why I wrote this like this. I don't typically use VPD at night. During the daytime, I will put my target value in for my set points as a VPD sometimes. That way, it can auto adjust my humidity as needed. But at nighttime, I don't really need to worry about that because um, what was I going to say? Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Because it's always pretty stable. Like I never want it to go. I don't care what my temperature is. I don't want it to go above 55% or 50% room humidity if I can avoid it. So regardless of whatever my temperature is at night, whether it's 72, 82, 75, whatever, this does not change. I always want my humidity to be capped. I don't ever want it to go past a certain point. And that's just me. That doesn't mean you have to do that. It's just that's how I feel safe. I do it for the reasons I said earlier, and I also do it just to kind of as a little cover your ass for the fact that I run so humid during the day. Um, so, and then day-night temperature differentials. As you can see up here, lights off. I have a range. So daytime range is always the same solid. Nighttime, it goes for weeks 1 through 3, 72 to 82. That's a 10-degree range there. I do that because I use that to help control the amount of stretch. So typically, what we find is during those first 3 weeks during stretch, the higher your differential is, the more stretch that you're going to have, the lower your differential is, the less stretch. So, for example, if I had a really stretchy strain, I know for a fact it just loves to creep on out there. If I'm running it at 83, 84 degrees during the day and I'm running LEDs, I'm also going to run it at between 82 to 84 degrees at night. I will keep it the same at that point. So it's going to be really hot at night as well for those first 3 weeks, and that helps stop the stretch. And if I like am running a really squat genetic that is, I want to try to promote some like nodal elongation and things like that, then I can actually crank it down and do like a 10-degree differential between daytime and nighttime to kind of help promote stretch. So that is why I have this here like that, and that is a use at your discretion. But once stretch is done, I go right back to an even keel 75 pretty typically. That's just like a nice sweet spot for me. So it doesn't have to be 75, it could be 76, it could be 77, it could be whatever you want it to be, but I like to just run it right around there. Um,
Perfect.
and then
Got a couple of questions that came in.
yep.
One of them ties a little bit more into what you were just talking about, so I'm going to hit this one first, and then the other one's a little bit more detailed. The first one was, do you have to worry about root zone temps with that high of temp at night, or are they happy without worrying about it?
Um, I never really worry about it. I mean, the highest I ever really see my root zone temps is like 80, 82, somewhere around what my ambient air temp is. And they're drying out at that point, So like it's not like there's a bunch of extra water in there going stagnant at that point and losing its DO like it would be if I was just putting hot water in during the day and leaving it soaked like that. Um, so if in fact, if anything, it'll help avoid that too, the stagnation with the lack of D, because that's like one of the main things that happens when your water gets too hot in the root zone is it loses its oxygenation or its ability to hold oxygen. And so like if you have a hot temperature though and a lot of airflow and a low humidity in the room, you're going to force that transpiration, which is going to pull more oxygen into around the roots and kind of help offset that. During the daytime, though, it's oftentimes like if you don't water for a whole day and especially if you're running under canopies in there, you don't have an adequate airflow, it's going to crank up. Like your substrate root zone temp is going to go up to like, close to what your ambient air temp is, and that's where we kind of are relying on those shots. I do keep my water tanks, my batch tanks in a climate controlled room where I keep that bitch pretty cold, like 72 degrees, 72, 73 degrees. And I do so for the very reason I'm using it to cool down when I'm giving all of those micro shots throughout the day. So, that is definitely something to think about. There's really no way around it though. If you've got a warm batch tank that's at room ambient air temp, you might have some oxygenation issues in there. You might have some brown roots going on, some slime buildup, like that could be a potential issue. So this is a big reason why I do recommend keeping your batch tank cooler because that's what you're using. And then if you are running under canopies, which is a big reason why a lot of those inner canopies get a little warmer. That's just one of those things that you got to do as preparation for it. Just like you increase your BTU load in the rooms to handle it from an environmental standpoint, you also need to add inner canopy airflow. You need to move that hot air out of there. So that's kind of how I would manage that.
Cool.
That's how I
Uh,
do manage that.
so- Sorry, this other one here. It's kind of two-parter. First one, if I'm seeing very high EC and drooping plants upon lights on in our bedrooms, but the plants are very high VWC, is the issue to do with the shot size or frequency overnight?
You're seeing high EC in the plants. You're saying high VWC overnight?
It says I'm seeing very high EC upon lights on,
Okay.
um, but the
What
plants are very high VWC.
Gotcha. So if you've got high EC, high VWC, that means you're not, anytime you have high EC, you're not flushing enough, and you don't want it to be that high. You're not flushing enough. If your VWC is too high, it means you're irrigating too much and not allowing it to dry back enough. So you need to cut back your waterings. I don't know what the specifics are on that. For example, like I don't know how many times a day you're watering. I don't know what your plant can is capable of drying back. What did you say what stage of growth this is in?
It's a bedroom, so
In the bedroom. Gotcha.
yeah.
So chances are you're probably irrigating too frequently in terms of you might need to skip a day or two in between, and you're not when you are irrigating, you're not pushing enough runoff. So it could be better to just like do a simple set of P1s on day one or whatever, or on a Monday, just as an example, and push a shitload of runoff to get that EC down and then wait 2 days to dry out, and then just do the simple P1s, put a flush at the very end of the P1s and get it pushed dried out. And then you're just going to wait extended periods to let, if that's what's happening. More than likely, your pot size is probably too big if that's what's going on in veg. You up potted too quick, or because that's not typically something that's going to happen in rock wool. So I'm assuming this is in cocoa, and if that's the case, then maybe we need to, like I said, you need to just change that irrigation strategy a little bit to give yourself more oxygenation, not as much overwatering. If you can always
Yeah.
email me too.
Uh,
I've had a couple people email. Just email me more specifics, and we can kind of go into that.
He added here too he said that was my guess. We are seeing minimal runoff with high EC and VWC, so I will try drying them out more. We are using 1 gallon cocoa.
Yeah, so but definitely you're gonna want to flush them before you wait that dry period. Because like if you just sit there and dry them out with the EC stacking like that, it's only gonna get way worse. It's gonna potentially burn them. So just give them a good flush, even if it's with pH water. Just give them a good flush to bring it down a good bit so that you're not dealing with any. I'm assuming when you're saying high EC, it's causing problems in the plant. Like you're seeing tip burn, things like that. And if that's the case, you need to get that down and then you need to let it chill, give it time to dry out before you give it another. And then when you're giving your irrigations, do not give P2s. They're clearly not ready for that. Just give them a couple P1s, get them up to where they're at field capacity, hit them with a quick flush to keep that down, and then just go through and hit the rest of the day your dry back. And if you need to wait an additional day, then that's what I would do.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. The other second part of that is, have you seen any benefits of under canopies for veg? One of our strains, veg, is incredibly stocky slash bushy, and I thought I could potentially mitigate the dying leaves in the lower canopy.
It depends how low you can get well, it depends how soon you're talking in veg, how long you're vegging for, because under canopies, a lot of people don't turn them on because at the height at which you're putting them, unless you're just laying them down in the water in the tray, like they're not really going to give you the benefit that you need. The plants have to be up past a certain point. So unless you're going to put your plants on risers or something to get them up to where the under canopy can actually hit up in there, you got to think like a plant that's a foot tall, in veg, let's just say it's like a foot and a half or so. There's not enough under canopy for the under canopy to really do much more than the over canopy is doing at that point.
Even
Once
with the 1 gallon pots, you think? If you're gonna have a 1 gallon pot,
Yeah, well, it's even still like let's just say you're running a 1 gallon
I mean,
pot.
you'd still have to put it like basically on the tray, but
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. It's like, look, you got a plant, oh, let's say it's a foot tall plant in a 1 gallon pot. He's just a young teen. You got it in there and you got your under canopy and it's sitting like right beside it or even slightly under it in an ideal world. How
oh,
much side of that plant surface area is actually going to receive light? It's
uh,
like if the plant itself is only this tall, like how much of this is really going to get hit compared to what you're going to get on overhead and bleed over light. So it's like
yeah,
I don't think personally it's really all that worth it unless until you get into like if you're vegging for multiple weeks until you
that's
get
what. Yeah, he just
if your
said that.
plant's 2 feet tall or so, if your
Yeah,
plant's at least 2 feet tall, yeah, for sure, you could totally give it a shot. I would just lower them a bit. Don't crank them on all the way. I know some people do not run them at all and have totally advised me against it. I haven't run them, but I also only veg for like 10 to 14 days. So I don't
Mhm.
ever get a plant that's big enough to warrant running under canopies for at that point. But if you were
Yeah,
vegging for extended periods, yeah.
he clarified by saying that this is for the late stage mothers in his group.
Oh,
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I would totally run them for moms. They're a
yeah.
big enough plant that it'll absolutely help you get good clones off the bottom. It's going to keep everything nice and healthy. So your all your good cuts underneath that aren't going to be, tops, obviously, they're probably going to be a hell of a lot more developed than they normally would be. And
Mhm.
so
I agree. Cool. We're all caught up there. That was good.
cool. Yeah, light intensity, depending on genetics, and what the plants can handle under ideal conditions. Again, light toxic, if you see light toxicity starting, a lot of times it can happen in multiple ways, damage on the leaves. A lot of times I've seen it look to me like a nutrient lockout. That's also what happens when I blast them with too much light. So obviously you can get bleaching and things like that, but even when a lot of times I'll have that almost looks like nutrient lockout on the very tops, like on the lights that are getting hit the hardest. And then I'm like, oh, since it's not happening everywhere else, it's a pretty clear sign that that's what that is. It's a very easy way to validate by just lowering the PPFD down, And I'm sure that there might actually be some nutrient issues going on in there too on a more biological level based on the stress level, like how much you're trying to push that one area, but I don't know enough about that to tell you guys and speak on that like I do. I just know that when I see that, I stop and I calm it down. This is the biggest thing right here. Final weeks of flower. If you can't add it, and we're talking like the last probably week 5 onward, 5, 6 onward, depending on how fast of a developer it is, you can't adequately lower your lights off humidity during the final weeks of flower. Raise your ambient air temp to help minimize pathogen risk. Like that is something that is a sacrifice that you have to make. But like I said, a lot of times we have to make a lot of sacrifices when we don't have certain control over things. So like if I was in week 8 and I could not get my RH down to a level where I know I'm safe of bud rot, you have to understand botrytis likes cold. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, botrytis likes cold. It likes cold and it likes humid and it likes water. And that's the perfect environment when people get in there and they start cranking down their air temps. They make it cold the final couple weeks, and you got to think the colder you make it in the room, the harder it is to control the humidity because of the relation to how much water can be held in the air. The warmer it is, the more water can be held, or I think that's how it is. The easier it is to control humidity. Humidity goes down as temperature goes up. It's that inverse relationship. So when you make it colder, humidity is going to go higher and it's going to put that much more load on your dehues. And if you are not able to keep that in check, raise your temps because it's deterring the ability for it's basically deterring bud rot from setting in because it's not so much of a favorable environment. Um, but it's also, like I said, it's also to help with the load on your equipment if you can't get it down. Same thing, kind of also, there's a big reason of why I would do that as well is when if looking final week 8, we're worried about that. We are running a little bit more humid than some people do at that point. But at night, also, if you are struggling with your humidity at night, just like in veg, like I was talking about, if your humidity is sitting too high at night, the plants go stagnant, right? They're not moving water like they normally would in a lower humidity environment. And remember that wonderful thing, calcium, that is immobile. You have to keep calcium moving. So a lot of times, PM, bud rot, all that stuff, they set in too in acidic environments. And so, the a number one way to have a natural prevention against that stuff is to keep your pH high in the leaves. And the way to do that is by moving the calcium there. So, like that's the biggest reason why I don't flush. Or if I had to flush for whatever specific reason, it would not be with plain water. There would be calcium, magnesium supplementation in there as well, because that's a big thing I've seen happen so many times is people will start flushing for a week. They basically starve the plant of calcium. No calcium's getting moved through the plant. pH of the leaf starts dropping, and then you basically have just created a perfect breeding ground for all of these problems to happen. So those are that's why I mean I can go into it further later, but that's big reason why I don't flush. It's another reason of why I would do this right here is if I can't keep water moving through via low RH, I'm cranking up the temps to make sure that I can help prevent all those other issues from happening. Okay. Um, no more questions. We can go to irrigation.
Yeah.
Um, so let's see. Irrigation now. I'm going to preface this real quick with this big bold thing right here. Just as I said before, when it comes to everything I just said up here, this stuff works pretty well for all genetics. I mean, this is just happy, healthy plants. This is not stressful at all. In fact, I don't like to stress with my environment at all. I like my environment to be perfectly dialed so that I can introduce controlled stress with my irrigation. So like in order for me to do these things right here, I want this to be as dialed as possible. I want my VPD to be in check. I want the plant not to be stressing over that as well as this. Now, this right here is the biggest thing ever. Not all this is like this is what I consider to be the traditional crop steering model when it comes to irrigation. There's of course a ton of variants, but for the most part, most people are doing something very similar to this in the industry right now. They need to know, and everyone needs to know that this crop steering, it only is going to work on plants who are receptive to it. So like when if you're running a really finicky, weak candy strain or something like that, that if you look at it wrong, it starts having problems and getting stressed out. This is not the strategy for that. You will have a worse result than if you just irrigated it normally, like you normally would. So like this is something that you've got a good genetic, what I call a heavy feeder, that like you can throw anything at it and you're not gonna hurt it for the most part, or it's not a very sensitive strain. Um, those are the ones that you can really make shine here, that you can really bring about fantastic. You're like unlocking things out of them that you were like, man, this was already a pretty decent strain before, but now look at it, now look what it's capable of doing. But this is like this is like putting a NBA or NFL player on steroids, I would say. Like you're gonna get some really great results. They had good genetics to start, they made it there, and then you're beefing them up. But this is like taking like if you try to just take any plant, it's like taking someone who is not ready to go to the NFL. They're not like 6'5" and jacked already, and then you just put them into that environment and you think, all right, I'm gonna give them steroids and they're gonna do great. And it's like a lot of times that doesn't happen. You gotta have some genetic disposition to be able to take on this kind of stuff. So a lot of times we'll run this stuff in a room. Maybe that wasn't a great analogy, I don't know, but we'll put these in rooms where they're running multiple genetics in each zone, one per zone, and they'll apply this strategy across the board, and they'll be like, this is doing great for 3 out of the 5 strains, but 2 of them look terrible. They absolutely hate their lives. And it's like, well, we just identified that those are not strains that we need to be doing this with. And that's, to me, one of the biggest things is just knowing your limitations. Because if you try to force this on something that can't handle it, it's never going to work. Or if you can figure out a way, let me know. Because so far, it's either it works or it doesn't. And if it is going to work and you do see that it's going to bring out positive traits in the plant, you're going to see it pretty quick. It's not like you got to wait 4 weeks for it to happen. Like you're going to immediately see the plant perking up and immediately see it ripping. So as soon as if you see that right off the rip, that's a really good sign that you're probably free to start experimenting, and pushing things in certain directions. So for my targets, veg, this one takes a lot we can get into this a lot because there is a lot of variables in how people veg. So we'll come back to that real quick on this, but so we'll get through veg, and once we get into veg, we move into flower. This is stretch weeks 1 through 3. I have 30% here as my dryback target, and then 30% plus here for weeks 2 and 3. Um, I say this again, a lot of variation, but 30% is the target that I shoot for. And when I say there's a note at the very beginning of this ebook where it says every dryback percentage in here is is referring to absolute, not relative. So when I say 30%, I mean like a hard 30% dry back. So if I was at 50 and I wanted a 30% dry back, I would be drying down to 20% VWC. So that is my goal. I'm always shooting for 30% for week one, two, and three at a minimum. Sometimes, though, depending on a whole lot of factors, the plant is able to drink more than 30%. And if it can do that and you're not dipping down, but like let's say you have that fuel capacity level at the top, say at 65 or 60, somewhere around there, and you can actually go down all the way down to 20 at that point, and you could technically push a 40%. If the plant is doing that and you're not having to force it or ruin its circadian rhythm by waiting an extra long time to make that happen, and it's able to hit that in the normal time frame that you would normally hit 30%, it is totally fine to do that. But again, use your discretion. If you try it and you're like, it's actually not looking so great, don't do it. It's just one of those things where it's like, I care that we're hitting 30%. If you can go over safely, by all means do so. That's why the plus is there. Flower weeks 4, 5, and 6, we're going to get into all of the irrigation side of this stuff in detail. So I'm not going to go too crazy on this because I have broken it down in weeks 1 through 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then 7 and 8, where we explain exactly what all this stuff is. For weeks 4, 5, 6, on a quick run through, 10 to 15%. 10% is the absolute bare minimum in the overnight 12-hour dry back window. Um, but that there is no cap. My cap is really usually around 30% if that ends up happening. But really, all I'm paying attention to in weeks 4 through 6 is that as soon as the lights go off and as soon as the lights go on, that 12-hour nighttime, right? Because I'm usually giving P2s all the way up until lights off. I let the plant dry back that for that full 12 hours without interruption. And as long as it's drinking 10% over that 12 hours, I'm usually not fucking with it. Most of the time, it is at 15%. It gets up to 15% plus during that 12-hour window. If it goes to 20, fantastic. If it goes to 25, great. If it goes to 30, also okay. But remember, we don't have a ton more wiggle room past 30 unless your VWC fuel capacity is much higher. Um, because if you were peaking at 50 and we're drying back 30% overnight, well, you're already hitting your minimum floor at that point. So we don't have a lot more wiggle room there. And so usually what I say is if you're and we have I've totally had this happen where they gave P2s all the way up to lights off, and then they drive back 30% overnight, and then had to get fail-safe shots. And it's like, if that is happening, what does that tell us? That tells us that that substrate is too small for the plant. So you either need to, if you're going to run that genetic again, and you're going to do everything the same as you did before setup-wise, then you either need to decrease your veg time on that plant, or you need to increase your substrate size and your pot size for the following run so that that does not happen. But otherwise, as long as it's anything more than 10%, I let it be. I let it ride. Some plants are 15, some plants are 20, some plants are 25. Doesn't matter. Um, I just want to make sure that I'm getting at least 10%. That is more important than what this actual number is here. 7 and 8, back to 30%. Plain and simple. I just go back to 30. I like to keep things as simple as possible. I do 30%, and usually I am giving P2s with that 30% at that point because the plants are fully grown and ripping. So if there's other options that we'll go through when we get through there, but like, yeah, 30%. So straightforward. That is kind of just is what it is. For EC targets, as we can see, it's not just a straight up number. And I know nobody likes to see this, but they just want a number, but it's never just a number. There's way too many variables. I guarantee you every single one of you here is a completely different growth setup than each other, and that's different than mine. So these are rough guidelines, but whatever these numbers are, they don't fucking matter. What matters is what is your plant doing. So, for example, in veg, slightly above feed EC, that's what I want my EC target to be. So if I'm feeding at 3 EC, I want to see my substrate on the sensors reading between 3 and 4. That tells me that I am pushing adequate 20-30% runoff and that it's not building up a ton of salt inside the substrate. Now, when I'm trying to stack EC in weeks 1, 2, and 3, I am looking for where I get slightly below tip burn. What does that mean? That means that as we go through we've gone through this many times before, but we're going to go through it again in detail when we hit the next section here on how do we stack EC. But when we run through our method to stack EC quickly, right, we're not going to push runoff and we're going to run with no runoff until we start to see tip burn beginning throughout the plant. When we see the beginnings of tip burn, it is up to us to then go look at what our sensor is reporting at peak, and that usually is going to be between somewhere between 6 and 12, depending on the genetic. Some plants might burn at 6, some plants might burn at fucking 15. You never know. It just all depends on what kind of psychogenetic you have and how hungry it is, and what its stress resistance is. So, but what I care about is the tip burn. As soon as I see the tip burn, usually I wait till I see it, the white tips on about 50% of the leaves. That's my sign, or 50% of the row. I start to see the white tip starting. I do not wait for that to progress. It's going to progress no matter what once it's started. But I want to prevent it from getting worse. So if that is 6, or let's just say 8 in this example, if I go in and I say, okay, I'm sitting at 8 at peak right now, that is my sign to tell me, okay, 8 is too much for this plant. It is causing it stress, it's causing it to burn. I need to bring it down a bit. So usually I'll go about 1 EC under where I notice the tip burn. So if it was at 8, my new target is going to be 7. That's where I want my peak to be for that specific plant. So as you can tell, that might be different between plant A, plant B, and plant C. I do care about a number correlation, but that is only for us to be able to like look at the graph and kind of see what's going on without being in the room constantly. So like I can take a note and say, I got tip burn on this plant at 8. I now know how to adjust my strategy because of that from here on out. And that's going to change every single time, depending on how your sensor's placed, how it's interacting with the media, what genetic is running. You might run the same clone fucking 5 times, and each time it might be slightly off. You never know.
Yeah.
It just happens like that. So this is what is important is we hit tip burn, we note what it is, we go 1 EC under is how I like to do it. And that's how I know what my target should be. For weeks 4, 5, and 6, slightly above VEC, just like we did for veg. That's why we're steering vegetatively. So if I'm putting 3 EC in, that's what's going into it. I'm almost never going to be able to hit. I'm almost never going to be able to get to baseline at 3 because we have already built up salts at this point. So as long as I don't go more than 2 EC above where I'm feeding, I'm usually chilling, and that's a sign that I'm pushing an adequate amount of runoff and it's not building up anymore. If I find that I'm starting to get negative impacts, I'm starting to get tip burn is progressing from these first 3 weeks here, even running it down this low, we can increase our runoff at that point. And then I know we're getting off rate. Real quick, same thing, week 7 and 8, 1 to 2 EC lower than weeks 1 through 3. So if this was at 8, 8 is where I hit burn, 7's where my target was. I'm going to go 1 to 2 EC under that. So I might go to 6, 5 or 6 now as my target for the final weeks because I do think that there's some benefit to stacking EC a little bit, but I don't think it's all necessarily that important compared to dryback and a bunch of other things like spectrum and everything else. So I'm just a very gradual when it comes to putting EC in the end. I could do without it, but it's nice to have, and it does happen naturally when you start pushing a 30% dryback. All right. Um,
Makes sense to me.
yeah. And so, like I said, I guess next time we can. No, and then real quick, these Copilot targets. So these are half of your targets here with P3 and EC. This is the rest, P0, P1, P2. And if you notice real quick, they're all the same for the most part. I do not change my P1s at all throughout the entire run. Once I find a good P1 sequence, I stick with it. There's no need. P2s, those are adjusted per EC, like we had talked about before, making them smaller and bigger to adjust how we want our EC to be, and drybacks are already stated here. So P0, I never really adjust. I keep it at 1 hour anyway, and I just set it at 2%. So as you can see, the amount of changes that you really need to make to enact this strategy are so fucking simple. I think I make like a total of like 4 changes throughout the whole run and just let it try to hit those targets. So that is the benefit of this strategy is why I do it is because it is simple, it is cookie cutter, it works well and can be applied across a vast range of setups. So, and with a minimal effort on like having to be neurotic about it. Obviously, it's going to get into a whole lot of shit when we get into explaining why I came to these conclusions, but it is really simple when it comes to application. So, all right.
Sweet man.
Yeah.
That sounds good. I appreciate everybody joining today. Thanks for the questions and everything. The participation definitely helps out. So appreciate y'all, and we'll see you next time.
Cool. Take care, guys.